Welcome back to Nifty 50 Photographers, and in today's video we're going to talk about colour and how to use colour as a tool in your fine art photography. Because with colour you can do lots of things. You can create emotions in the viewer and you can set a tone or mood for your image. Not only that, you can create your own style or aesthetic, and if you stay to the end I'll show you a little used tool in Lightroom that will really make it easy for you to create your own style and aesthetic. It'll give your photos a standardized look that when people look at them they'll go, ah, I know, Richard Gill took that photo, I can see that's his style. So let's start with the basics. Right, there are three things that you need to think about with colour. One is you need to have an understanding of the colour wheel. The second thing is you need to understand colour harmony. And finally, you need to understand colour psychology. So let's have a look at the colour wheel. Now, I find a really useful tool is the Adobe Color tool. And I've put a link to that here, and this is it on the screen. So the colour wheel is split up into primary, secondary and tertiary colours, for example. And you can see that here on the screen. Now, if we use primary colours in our images, they'll have a very strong visual impact. And that leads us nicely on to talking about colour harmony. So first of all, let's look at complementary colours. Now, these are colours that are usually opposite one another on the colour wheel. Now, if you use complementary colours, they will always work well together. So think about that in your images. Now, the second type of colours we could use are analogous colours. So these are colours that are different shades of the same colour. You can see some examples here. And then finally, you have what is called triadic colours. So this is really just a mixture of the three. Could be red, green and blue, for example. So now we've got a basic understanding of how the colour wheel works, we need to know a little bit about colour psychology. Now, one of the great things about the Adobe Color tool is you can type in what kind of mood you want to create. So here you can see some examples. So I've got spring on the screen. I can change that to summer. I could change it to happy if I want something emotional, or I could type in my own search word like moody, and it'll come up with all the colors that you associate with moody images. It shows you a few images as well, so it's really a great tool for helping you think about how you want to edit or how you want to plan your photo in the first place. There's some very basic stuff you probably already know about color, like warm and cold. So reds and yellows obviously are warm, blues are cool, but they can evoke other emotions. For example, blue images tend to be very calming and slightly mystical, whereas an image with a lot of red in it might make you feel more agitated, or it might make you feel more emotional. Feelings like love are often associated with red. Once you understand these concepts of how colour affects the psychology, then immediately you know what kind of colours will work well in your image for the kind of mood or emotion you want to evoke in the viewer. Now, we often use complementary colours for that, and a very classic one is to use teal and orange or blue and orange. But there are also others that will work together well, like blues and purples. For my own images, I tend to use a combination of two, either teal or orange and a sort of magenta and blue or cobalt sort of colour, because that's my style and my aesthetic. And I'm going to try and progress probably more to using more blue and orange, so I can try and get a more consistent look rather than mixing the two. But choose ones that you feel comfortable with, that reflect your style and the kind of images you want to create. So I did say if you stayed to the end, I would show you exactly how that works. So in Lightroom, there is a tool called the calibration tool, and it's pretty misunderstood. So let me just very quickly explain what the calibration tool is. So in your camera, behind every pixel is a red, green and blue sensor. Now, what color really is the red or the green or the blue? And you've probably heard people say, oh, I really love the colors that come from Sony or from Nikon or from Canon. And what you're really saying is, I love the way that that particular camera manufacturer has interpreted what I mean by red, green and blue. How have they calibrated their camera to reflect those colors? So if we want to set our own aesthetic, then what we're really saying is, how am I going to interpret that red, green and blue to get the visual appeal that I want? And you do that by changing the calibration. Now this has a global effect on your photos. Let me show you what I mean. So if you look at this color wheel, if I change the hue of the red slider, you see not only does it affect the reds, but it affects all the other colors too. And the same is true if I change the hue of the green slider as well. And finally, I'll just prove the point with the blue slider. Now the saturation underneath really is affecting how intense that color will be, so you can play with that as well. But if you're wanting to set your own aesthetic, for example, something that is, say, teal and orange, then you want to move the sliders in that direction. So you'll change the hue of the red slightly more to orange, and the hue of the blues slightly to more of a teal color, and that would create your own aesthetic. And you can play around with the other things like color grading and the hue, saturation and luminance sliders just to fine tune to get the look you want. Now if you find that slightly confusing and you'd like to see a more detailed explanation of this whole color grading process, from combining the calibration with the hue, saturation sliders and the color grading tools, I'm happy to make a longer video about that, explaining it in more detail. Just let me know in the comments. But in the meantime, next time you're going out to create a photo, when you see the image you want, think about what kind of emotion that you want to evoke in your viewer. Now what kind of colors would evoke that emotion, and try and incorporate that into your photograph as you take it, or certainly when you come back and edit it later. And you'll find it makes a big difference to how people view your photos. You'll immediately strike that connection with them. Conversely, you can create a negative emotion if you want by combining colors that have very high contrast and don't complement one another. So if you wanted, maybe you're doing a book cover image or something like that, and you wanted to create that uncomfortable feeling, you can use color in that way too. But go out and have some fun, experiment, play with it, see what you get. And in the meantime, I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.